Project managers, have you ever felt like you should get that promotion or a better job? Start a business. Write that book. Have you ever felt you were made for more but didn't know where to start?
Welcome to the PM for the Masses podcast with your host, Cesar Abeid.
Learn from the experts. Think outside the box. Have a voice, network, and be extraordinary.
PM for the Masses podcast.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to our show today. Today, I will admit for the first time, I'm actually excited about OKRs of all things. My guest today is Ben Lamorte, a renowned expert in objectives and key results, also known as OKRs, if you've been living under a rock in the business world in the past decade. And he's also the founder of OKRs.com. Great URL, by the way. Really recommend you go in there. Ben is widely recognized for his extensive experience in coaching organizations around the world on how to effectively implement OKRs. He has mentored countless OKR coaches and has helped hundreds of organizations achieve clarity and measurable results and success through well-defined objectives and key results. He's also a prolific author, and I'm particularly excited to discuss his book, the OKRs Field Book, which I devoured. And this book provides a step-by-step guide for not only implementing OKRs, but by helping others implement their OKRs. It's about helping OKR coaches, and we're going to get into that in our conversation today. And today, not only we're going to cover that, but Ben is going also to share insights on how to use OKRs to drive alignment, focus, and performance within teams. We'll also discuss common pitfalls in OKR implementation and strategies for overcoming them. Mr. Ben Lamorte, how are you?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks for asking. How about you?
I'm doing great too. Listen, it's an honor to have you here on the podcast. You are one of the celebrities in the field of OKRs. In fact, I went and asked ChatGPT, who are the top 10 names in this field, and I think you're like number 3 or something like that. So it's
okay. That's sort of a Snow White, right? So Cesar, you're doing the Snow White thing. Who is the greatest OKRs coach of them all? Okay, so I'm not number 1, but at least I'm in the top 10. That feels good.
That's right. So no apples for you yet, but there might be one coming down in the mail.
I'm assuming John Doerr might be in there, but he might have had a little bit more money than me as far as being an OKRs guy. Let's just put it that way. I think he's going to get more Google searches.
This is a better publicist, I suppose. Right? John Doerr, Andy Grove, Christina.
I can't really compete with these guys.
Yeah, but you're right there. So that's really
good
cool.
Company.
Yeah, and it's great that you're still writing and you're available and you're willing to be on podcasts like this one. So I'm very excited to have you on to talk about not just OKRs, but how to promote OKRs, right, as a professional. So I think for those listening right now, if you don't know what an OKR is, maybe this is not the episode for you. Maybe we can do another episode like introducing OKRs, but maybe briefly, Ben, if you could just the Cliff's Notes version of the definition of an OKR, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah. So OKRs comes out of the 1970s with Andy Grove. It gets really popular around the time of 2000 or so in the Silicon Valley. It starts to spread to Oracle and other companies. And then, of course, with Google in the late 90s, it ends up that John Doerr introduces OKRs to Google. And of course, Google goes wild, right, and uses OKRs even at the individual person level and kind of comes out of the closet, so to speak, and says, hey, we are Google and we do OKRs. And that was 2014. And once that video came out, it was a Google Ventures video. It really put OKRs on the map to the general marketplace. In fact, even companies like Sears, which is no longer in business, but they adopted OKRs. So you started seeing OKRs used in all industries, not just high tech or software companies, but rather, I'm seeing churches use OKRs, schools, government, nonprofit, banks are using OKRs. So really anybody can use it, and it's a goal-setting framework, right? Where you come up with objectives, which are the broad areas where you want to focus to improve. And then the key results, which are the, how do we know we've made that progress? Like the quantifiable metric style key results. And that's pretty much OKRs in a nutshell. And now it's like you said, I think even just a couple of years ago, I might not have wanted to start a podcast by saying, we assume you know about OKRs. If you don't, you could go figure it out. I think even just a few years ago, most people didn't really know about OKRs, but in 2018, the book Measure What Matters came out. That's the one by John Doerr. And it really became a bestseller, right? And I think that's really now where you're starting to see OKRs pretty much become a mainstream business term that you hear in almost all companies these days.
Right. I have a lot of thoughts about OKRs, especially related to project management. Project management, usually we like checking things off and then look back and say that's done, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's an element of OKRs that you don't necessarily have to 100% complete everything. OKRs can be like inspirational, right? Like an objective that we are aiming for, but in this quarter, we don't necessarily need to like check that off as done. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, one of the big mistakes that we see with OKRs is that the key results become things like, post a blog or get the job description updated for the chief information officer or something like that. Mm-hmm. And these are more like the checkbox activities that just need to get done. And we still need to do all those things. And those things are what we call part of the key result action plan. But key results are really a higher level measurable result. So for example, going back to that post the blog thing, posting the blog, that's a great activity to do. Go ahead and check the box. I'm not taking anything away from that. But you have to ask yourself, what is the intended outcome of the activity? Right. So I think most people in project management, they have some kind of a success metric for the project. So if the project is launch the blog, I'm kind of picking on that one. Mm-hmm. Then the question is, well, okay, but what is the intended outcome of the blog? How will we know the blog is a success rather than, okay, we just checked the box and now we can sort of feel good that we did something. And that's really where you start to look at those questions like why, right? Why is it that we're launching the blog? How will we know it's a success? And usually you'll come up with something like, well, so we'll get more blog subscribers or we'll get more traffic on the website and we can brainstorm those. But ultimately with key results, we don't want just a whole bunch of things. We want to get a very small set of key results. So we might have something like increase the number of signups for the demo from X to X plus 100. Mm-hmm. I say that X to X plus 100 because I want to specify how many we're getting, let's say per month in Q3 due to the blog, right? In other words, the blog adds an extra 100 demo subscribers or demo, signer uppers or whatever. These are like leads. Now we're starting to talk about what it means to know that the blog is a success, right? So it's not necessarily how many blog posts we do. Look, we did 20 blog posts, we got 10 leads. I'd rather have we did 2 blog posts, we got 100 leads. At the end of the day, I'm looking for that measurable outcome.
Right. And then, and those need to tie into some objective that's a higher level and less, maybe a little bit more fuzzy, not so like number oriented. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the objective, might be something broad, like make this partner API project a success, right? So you hear things like that. Like basically from project management perspective, the objective is typically, make the project a success, right? I mean, whatever that product is, fill in the blank. And then what I like to do here is start by saying why, right? So after you have your objective, let's just talk about why that objective is so important. And so if we have make the API project a success, we might have a why like, well, we're losing 25% of our sales prospects due to compatibility with other systems, and we need to fix these issues through API, which allows us to connect or something like that. Oh, okay. So that educates me and somewhat motivates me as to why are we doing this? Make this partner API project a success. Like, educate and motivate me, and then go to the key results, right? Win our first Microsoft connector client, or something like increase the number of sales reps who are certified to demo the new connector tool from 2 to 100 or something. I'm making these up, but it shows you that there's measurable statements that then say, oh, okay, now here's how we know that the project is a success, as opposed to here's all the things we need to do in order to make the project a success. And we need both of those things, right? We need to do things, but we also need to have those measurable results.
Yeah, and understand why, right? And it connects. I think it helps with alignment as well. Like if, especially as, if you're in the position to approve projects, everybody and their uncle has an idea of what to do next. But this is a good test. You can, this is aligned with the objective here. And let's just dwell on that for a minute, because look, when I first started out with objectives and key results, I would say, I was good. I'm not going to say I was a terrible OKR coach, but I would write down the objective and then say, okay, so now what are the key results? I literally went step 1. What is the objective, right? Where do we want to focus on?
and then, improving. And then I would say key results. How will we know we've achieved that objective? When you mentioned why, and I guess I mentioned it too, we both did. Let's give ourselves both credit. But that's really now an intermediate step that we're finding is absolutely critical, back to your point, for alignment. It allows us to get on the same page about why this thing's important. It also drives engagement, right? When we know why something's important and we know why is it important now, right? Then we're more engaged. We're more excited about it. And so that's where I think objectives and key results, it almost could be called objective, why, and key results, right? That would be a good takeaway from today is just, especially if you're a project manager, don't just say, hey, the objective of our project is blah, blah, blah. Here are the key results. Say, hey, the objective of our project is, okay, blah, blah, blah. But then tell me why is our project so important, right? Let's dwell on that and spend a little extra time on that, discussing that, and then go to the key results, right? Here's how we'll know we're successful. And in an ideal world, now we'll have those action plan check the boxes, right? Because underneath each of our key results, there's probably a lot of things that we need to do, like micro steps or milestones that got, little mini projects that got to get done, like tasks, right? That can be done each week.
Mm-hmm. So OWKR, then OKR. Put the Y in there after the.
We have a new one. It's not OKR. It's OKR.
I mentioned it first. I said it first.
Yeah. Okay. OWKR. Cesar gets the credit for that.
Right. Ben, speaking of improving performance and productivity, as people who've been listening to the podcast know, I've recently been trying out this interesting product called Magic Mind. And it's funny, they actually reached out to me and sent me some samples to try before sponsoring the podcast. And I've been using it daily, pretty much every day for a few weeks now. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with how it's affected my focus and mental clarity, especially when I'm working on complex projects or even OKR planning at this point, right? So it's not a coffee replacement, but a mental performance shot. That's what I like to call it. And I add it to my morning routine, basically. And what I really like about it is that it's designed for long-term mental performance, not just a quick fix like a cup of coffee, right? So he has this blend of mushroom nootropics and adaptogens, and it gives you over 100% of your daily vitamin C and D in each bottle. And it's a tiny little bottle. And I've noticed since I started taking it that I'm able to stay focused for longer periods without feeling stressed or jittery. It's helped me be more efficient in my work while still enjoying my day, right? I'm not stressed. If that makes sense. And if you're listening now, if you're interested in trying out for yourself, you can get up to 48% off your first subscription or 20% off one-time purchases with the code PROJECT20 at checkout. Just go to magicmind.com/project to claim the offer. And I'd love to hear it if it helps you and helps you with your OKR implementation, for example, as much as it has helped me in the past few weeks. So thank you, Magic Mind, for sponsoring the podcast. Okay, so that's the OKR. And I have worked under OKRs. I have helped set OKRs, and it can be, sometimes it's very straightforward, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's hard to get buy-in, but oftentimes it's a little bit, the folks who are at the top level thinking about that, what's the objective for this quarter, what are the KRs going to be, they get really excited about that, they share that, and then it goes out there into middle management and lower project managers, things like that. So oftentimes there's a little bit of a disconnect there. I think this book is, correct me if I'm wrong again, but if there's an attempt here to kind of, okay, how can we empower everyone, right, to be OKR coaches and help promote that language and that way of thinking across the organization? Is that the gist of why you wrote this?
Yeah, it is. And I guess, look, I've just been going to OKR workshops the last couple of weeks as the new year starts, right? 2025 just kicked off recently. And so that's a hot time, maybe not January, but February, it starts to pick up because organizations are really getting into operationalizing their goals and things like that. Mm-hmm. And you're right. Sometimes OKRs are pretty straightforward, and that's great, right? You might be working in a business where it's very simple, like booking.com was one of my clients way back when. And it was like, look, we need to increase the number of room nights booked, right? That's what we do. We book room nights, so that's kind of our North Star, and it happens to be a metric. But in many cases, you're working with an organization where, I would ask them, hey, so do you have OKRs? And they would say, yeah, and happened to be a big bank. And they pulled out this binder, and I'm not kidding you, it had like 2,000 metrics in it. Jeez. And it said, here are all our OKRs. I'm like, oh God. So that's not how you do it. OKRs is not just simply, here are the metrics. And as far as how the organization sets their strategy and converts that into OKRs, right, which is typically an intermediate time frame, this to me is really important. So you'll see often most companies will have a 5-year strategy or a 10-year strategy or a multi-year strategy of some kind. That's fairly long term. And they'll also have an annual budget, right? Which usually it's very hard to connect the budget to the strategy. That's a whole different topic. Mm-hmm. But then they'll have, let's say, sprints or like weekly tasks and things like that. And they might not have a 3 to 6 month time frame for, holding ourselves accountable, measuring progress, understanding are we making progress or not? Like just check in on that, every 3 to 6 months. They may not have that. I think more organizations are starting to have that, but that's really where OKRs come into play. And I think that there's multiple ways that this happens, but I just want to speak to project managers a little bit. Look, you might be a project manager and maybe your company uses OKRs, but you might be working on a project that you feel doesn't really connect to the company's OKRs or to the business unit or some higher level set of OKRs. And what I'm trying to tell you is that's okay. I think it's a myth that OKRs is a cascading goal setting model where everybody is working toward the same goal in a company. I mean, this could happen in theory, but often it doesn't, right? So a classic example of this, based on a true story, I was working with a company during the pandemic and everybody was, all about getting onto mobile apps and getting, I don't know exactly how to say this without giving it away. Let's just say getting into the kinds of things like delivering businesses and, automating things so that you don't have to see people in person. But this one group, which was a data platform group, they had this massive project and they had to migrate all these stores off of these legacy databases. This issue became very exposed during the pandemic because get this, these stores were literally on DOS. Okay. Jeez. DOS is like what the, like that was like the 1970s or 80s or something. That was the operating system. And so I kid you not, they said, well, if we want to make a change, we have to call some guru in India who can program in DOS or something. I mean, there were like 3 guys left and they were probably 100 years old. So we need to get off of these legacy stores now. We can't do this anymore because of the nature of the pandemic and the need for remote work and, systems connectivity. And so their objective was migrate all these stores off these legacy databases and get them up to speed. And it sounds like just project update all these stores. And it pretty much was. And they pretty much had a bunch of checkboxes. Did this store get updated? There's lots of subtasks within there. But that became the OKR, was to migrate all these legacy stores. Here's why it's important. And then they talked about, there's a pandemic. We need more remote. We got these 3 guys in India who can do DOS and this isn't sustainable, right? It takes us weeks to make a change. It costs thousands of dollars. And we're not even sure we'll be able to make changes to the system unless we get off of the system. And we've known this for a long time, but now's the time. So they created that sense of urgency. So it wasn't just why, it was also why now. And at the end of the day, when they looked at the company's OKRs, this was totally unrelated. Everything was expanding into mobile, doing all these things, which, I mean, you could try to say that this was related, but it really didn't feel like it was. But that's okay. I sort of thought of it as an orphan objective. But the point I'm making here is, as long as the data platform team or whatever project they're working on has an objective with a why statement, and they can go and have a conversation with a more senior executive, and that senior executive says, oh yeah, that's absolutely the priority. That's what we need to focus on. Then that's okay. That's what I consider to be alignment. So alignment is not necessarily a line that you can draw that shows you how your project's objective directly kind of moves into some other higher level objective or key result.
That's great. I'm so glad you brought this up. I think sometimes people, they work especially folks in big organizations, they work in a division that is like housekeeping, right? Or like our compliance. And the work feels like very operational and reactive and just keeping the plate spinning. And they might feel disconnected from the reason for being for the organization and the lofty goals that's talked about that by the CEO, things like that. But like you said, it's fine to it's almost like a fractal way, like it doesn't have to be all like this pyramid, but I think as long as you can justify why you're doing what you're doing, and then I should be able to look back and say, hey, yeah, we actually did it, right? Measuring, and so you're not just reacting, but you're actually being proactive about what you are working on and choosing it wisely based on good reasoning, and you're aligned with leadership, then it's fine, right?
I think that's right. Yeah. And I think what you also said, maybe you didn't mean to, but maybe you were getting to it, which is these infrastructure style projects, right? Which are not, it's not like we're doing a sales project, which is my example of my API connectors, right? Well, hey, if we fix the project API connector, well, guess what? Now the sales team will be able to sell more deals. Like we're opening up a whole new market. And so it's very clear actually why this is valuable. And the CEO will say, ooh, this is good because we're going to get more revenue. But so many of the projects we do, it's very hard to connect what you're doing to revenue. And sometimes it may even be hard to connect what you're doing to cost, right? And so you're kind of like, at the end of the day, why am I doing this? Because you really do. I think this is a good challenge for any project, right? It's kind of a financial question, right? What is the financial benefit of this project? If you can't answer that, you do actually have to ask the question, well, then why are we doing this? I mean, we're a business. I mean, I guess there's maybe some exceptions to this, but for the most part, unless you're working in maybe a nonprofit or something, or government, right, where we just are dealing with compliance. A lot of times, if we're going to do a project, we should be able to answer the question, how does this impact financials? Not necessarily right away, but how does this set us up to favorably impact financials? And I get it. Sometimes the why we need to do this is so our CFO doesn't go to jail, right? Or so that, we don't get dinged on the audit report or something. And, even then you could argue that somehow that connects to the financials.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. And and I like that approach too, because that financials are usually the easiest to measure, right? Like, because you know how much you're spending and you can estimate how much that's going to save you in the long term or short term. So
right. But I used to be a driver-based planning guy, which was basically building financial models. Mm-hmm. And so you would say the shin bone is connected to the thigh bone, right? And eventually, if you do this many of those and you multiply that units times this price, eventually you'll make money. Mm-hmm. But what's really interesting is with OKRs, okay, yes, there are those superficial financial OKRs. Like, let's increase the average price per deal from $20 to $30. Why? Mm-hmm. Well, because then we'll make more money, right? So the analysis of why the objective is important is sort of like obvious. But really where the action is with OKRs is farther down that sort of pipeline of creating value. And how do we then operationalize that with these key results? That's really where I find the challenge. And lately I've been working more with efficiency. Like, I guess maybe the economy is bad. News alert. The economy. If you haven't heard yet, put on your seatbelts. This is me. I'm not a stockbroker, but I'm not so optimistic now about the economy for a number of reasons. What's going on? There's so much uncertainty now. Mm-hmm. Who knows especially if you work for the government or things, if you'll even have a job.
Right.
So that said, you really do see the action in like infrastructure teams with security teams, cybersecurity being a hot topic. Lots of security projects getting put in place. Well, those are really hard to write OKRs because those are more protective, right? Those are more like kind of keep the lights on work, right? How do we write OKRs for this keep the lights on work? It almost sounds like an oxymoron or something, because OKRs are about trying to make improvements. It's not just trying to keep things the way they are, but you can also find that it can be an interesting exercise to try to write OKRs around how to protect things or how to reduce or shrink things.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. This is two ends, right? Like especially during times of recession and bad economy, we need to sell more, but we also need to spend less. So then you can have OKRs associated with either end of that spectrum there. But the thing about financials, so I think I find sometimes that the folks who are in a position to approve the work that you want to do, they tend to be the finance folks. So if you speak their language, chances are that you can get your project approved, for example.
Right. Yeah, I had a finance team. It was like this. I don't want to say it was Elon Musk, but it was like this new finance guy came in, and he was kind of like had that attitude. Yeah. He was like the Elon Musk of finance teams. He was like, "All right, what's the problem? We're going to go and clean house." And in this case, he said, "Look, we're having all these delays. We're losing deals to our competitors because the sales team is only empowered to discount like 20%, or like senior. See, it was so complicated, right? Like some senior sales reps can discount 25%, but only for this product. And it was just too complicated. He said, here's what we're going to do. Any sales rep has the ability to discount anything up to 25%, but going from 20 to 25, that extra 5% comes out of their commission. Right. That's it. Yeah. And it's just like, all of a sudden the sales team was like, oh, that's how it works, right? So it was a really clear rule. And by making that, they were able to reduce the sales cycle time. They didn't have to keep, the whole thing when the sales rep says, let me go to my boss and see if I can get approval for this because you want a discount. No, they were completely empowered to do it. So those types of things, which I still don't really think that has anything to do with Elon Musk, by the way. I think I've just been reading too much of them in the media.
Right.
But the idea of, simplifying and making things, empowering sales teams, so getting rid of financial barriers that the finance team was putting in place, sometimes reducing those barriers can be the big OKR, right, that drives the organization forward.
Right. It's basically you're making a system that's more robust and self-sufficient by putting the built-in incentives right there as part of it, right? It's like a governor or a thermostat type of thing, and that could be an objective for the quarter. We're going to eliminate some of the toil here by changing how we do things, and that's great. We can save money along the way and the hassle, and people can work on more impactful things instead of worrying about, hey, can I give the discount or not?
Right.
All right. So OKRs, all that stuff. Great. Now, OKR coaching. Can you talk about that a little bit? Can you define it for us?
Yeah. So first of all, let me define OKRs. I realize I haven't even done that.
Okay.
So taking OKR coaching into, let's talk OKRs and then we'll talk coaching. So OKRs is really a verb. Right. I mean, you could consider OKRs as a noun, right? But it's a pretty superficial understanding, right? An OKR is an objective and its key results. So it's probably one sentence of an objective, improve the connector process for APIs or something. And then below it has some key results, like I mentioned, win the first MS connector client and maybe increase sales reps who can demonstrate this connection from whatever to whatever. So that would be an OKR. I guess you would add in the Y, like we talked about, right? Is to really make it an OWKR. Mm-hmm. And then what you want to think of, though, is, okay, OKRs is really more than that. OKRs is really a critical thinking framework. So it's when you're asking questions, that's what I mean by critical thinking framework. There's a set of questions that you keep asking. Typically, it's the coach that's asking these questions. And those questions are pretty much, well, okay, there's really three fundamental questions, right? It's where do we want to focus to improve and make progress in the near term, and why, right? That's the question that's going to get us that objective. And most people have a pretty good idea as to what their objectives are. But the key result question is, well, okay, at the end of that period, maybe it's a quarter, maybe it's 6 months, how will we know we've achieved the objective? That's a really good question, right? Because if you say, well, our fundamental objective is to make this project a success, great, here's why it's important. Yeah, but how will we know? How will we measure our success of that project objective? Okay, good question. Usually then people give me a to-do list. Well, we got to do this, we got to do that, right? That's just how our brains work. So the OKR coach then says, what is the intended outcome of that task? Kind of like we did earlier in the discussion. What is the intended outcome of launching the blog or what have you? Mm-hmm. And then ultimately it's to drive leads. So we get those key results. Now, it's a critical thinking framework where you're asking those three questions, so those three flavors of questions. And it's an ongoing discipline, meaning you're always asking these questions. So even I wrote an OKRs book called the OKRs Field Book, but I have a coach. And my coach, who happens to not be an OKRs coach, although in the story I'm about to give you, as I'm writing my book, my coach is talking to me. Actually, my coach is being an OKRs coach, whether they know it or not, because I'm working on this book. I'm putting all this time. It's this huge project, right? And my coach says, what is the intended outcome of writing the book? And that's one of the basic questions that OKRs coaches ask, right? What is the intended outcome of writing that book? And I'm sitting here going, well, it's definitely not to make money, because you're never going to make money writing an OKRs book. They're never going to make a movie out of it or anything like that, right? This is a niche market. And anyway, I wrote a book in 2016, and I can prove you that I did not make money from that book.
Yeah, me too.
And I guess it's not that I'm trying to gain more market share, because at the time, I'm only one person, and maybe a couple people actually on my team. But with coaching, you can only take on so many clients. It's not like I'm selling a product where I'm trying to scale. So I'm telling them, I don't really want more clients. Okay, Ben, great. I'm clear why you wouldn't write the book. That's not my question. What is the intended outcome of writing the book? And a good coach keeps asking the same question, right? I give you this story because, look, I'm the coachee, right? I'm the person being coached. And I'm just going off on these tangents. That's kind of how it works. So the coach has to keep them focused, right? That's not what I'm asking you. What is the intended outcome of writing the book? And it was like, wow, I had never really thought about it. I was just getting the book done. I was just trying to check this off my list. Like, look, I got my book done. I'm sort of thinking it would be cool because I'll write this book and I'm the only author. Whereas in the 2016 book, I was a co-author. So I guess that will feel good. But really, is that really the intended outcome of me writing this book so I can feel good that I wrote a book where I'm the only author? I mean, that's pretty weak. So I started thinking about it more and more until I finally came to the real reason. The intended outcome of writing the book is to connect me with other OKRs coaches and have a common framework for having a discussion about OKRs coaching. And inevitably, it led me to create the OKRs Coach Network, which is a network of OKRs coaches, about 100 coaches from around the world. And almost everyone in that network has the field book. And we have these principles and we're debating what's the right way to coach these people or what do we do when we run into these challenges. Sometimes we're exchanging leads and it gives me a sense of having colleagues. So I realized that's the intended outcome. And therefore, it informed how I wrote the book, right? So when you know the destination of where you're ultimately going, you're going to, begin with the end in mind. You've heard all of this stuff before. So this is just like OKRs coaching, right? It's you ask those questions, you're doing it all the time. Now, going back to the definition, it's trying to get people to work together. So in my example, it's a little bit contrived because I'm just some one person working on a book. But typically, if you're working in a company, you're working on a project, you're working with multiple people. And so we have this common OKR language to get people to work together. So we all know why we're doing what we're doing. We all are aligned on how we'll measure success. And now we can focus our effort to drive those measurable contributions. So that's really what OKRs is. And I think embedded in that, I pretty much gave you the answer to what the OKRs coach does. The OKRs coach really helps the organization or the client figure out the answers to those questions, right? What is the most important thing to focus on? The objective, why, what do the key results look like? And, asking that question, what is the intended outcome of the task? I guess the fine print is they have to do this over 3 phases, right? So the first phase is this the time to go into the 3 phases?
Let's go into the 3 phases of coaching, yes.
Okay, let's do it. So so this is the kind of the main reason also that I wrote the book was I had worked with about 100 clients and I started to realize that what not to do. Okay, I had made so many mistakes by then that I knew, don't do this. If you want to learn about my mistakes, you read the field book, you'll see a lot of stories in there. Mm-hmm. But I realized that there is this framework that works. It's a 3-phased approach, right? Step 1 or phase, I call it step A, phase A, whatever you want to call it, or phase 1. I think I call it phase 1. It doesn't really matter. You can use the alphabet or numerical. The point is you start with deployment parameters. And these are answer all the questions you need to have the answers to before you can actually deploy OKRs correctly and with success. And that's things like, how many OKRs will we have? What teams are setting OKRs? Will we put Y after the objective? Hint, yes, you will, right? Let's say you have things like, how long is the cycle, right? Is it a quarter? Is it 6 months? Is it 4 months, right? How many months long is it? It's good to have a standard when you're first starting. And are we going to write key results that are super stretched, like almost impossible to achieve? Or are we going to write them more like very realistic or somewhere in between, like a 50-50 level, so that we sort of standardize what a key result looks like, right? Once we have the answers to all those questions, we're done with that first phase. That shouldn't take more than a couple hours, right? It's not a massive project, but it's super important because it serves as the foundation for your OKRs program. So a good OKRs coach starts by aligning on those deployment parameters, the quote rules of the road, before we actually do part 2, which will be the training. Because now that we know what we're doing, we can actually train an organization on how to do OKRs. So the OKRs coach actually does facilitate that training. And they do that with some OKRs theory, which is usually pretty short, just sort of goes over those deployment parameters or how we're going to do OKRs, gives some examples of OKRs, gives definitions, and then says, all right, let's do it, allocating most of their time to actually practicing building OKRs. Once the training is done, and the training, I used to do it for a full day, maybe even 2 day. It's now more like 2 to 3 hours because everybody lives in this super intense, let's just get going with our lives society. Mm-hmm. And then after we do the training, we get into the OKR cycle. And this is really phase 3, and this is where you want to be as an OKRs coach. This is where you add value. This is where you ask those questions, right? Like, what is the most important objective? Why? Let's get the key results. And that's step 1 of the cycle. And then we do step 2, which is checking in and monitoring progress. And that's the check-in throughout the cycle. And then at the very end, we do a reflect and reset, which is the final step of the cycle. So really, that's it. OKRs coaching end to end, right? It's those 3 phases. And then in that final phase, which is cycle coaching, you just keep going in a loop from one cycle to the next, hopefully supporting an organization for a long time. Okay.
That's great. Now, who are the actors here, like in the deployment phase, for example? Who in the organization, for example, would be making these decisions about, what the objectives are, the KRs, and, what the KRs are stretch or not, things like that?
Yeah. So we start with that phase 1 deployment parameters, and we need one executive sponsor, typically somebody who's a pretty senior person. And that person, it could be in a small company, the CEO, but typically it's like the director of the security team or the head of a business unit or something like that in a bigger company. That person will pretty much approve those deployment parameters, and maybe they'll come to a half an hour of that discussion along the way, that 2 or 3 hours that it's going to take to nail these things down. And then you'll need what we call the project lead. And the project lead is usually either a chief of staff type person, an HR business partner, an agile coach, something like a more of a mid-level person who's ideally been in the organization for a while, kind of knows the organization, and is somebody that is a good communicator and people kind of respect in some ways. Now, that said, it's better to have 2 of these people, because if you only pick one person to be this, I call this person the OKRs project lead, you run the risk of, so OKRs is just a finance thing, right? Or OKRs is an HR thing because, Beth is from HR and she's the OKRs project lead, so it must just be some HR initiative. That's a problem. So we want to have 2 people. Maybe we have Beth from HR, but we also have, Fred from engineering or something like that. So now we see that, it's not just a single department that's trying to force OKRs into the organization. As well, having those 2 OKRs project leads, if you're the external coach, it's important because then you have 2 people that can play the buddy system to talk amongst themselves, right? So that you're not the only one talking to somebody in the organization. So you're creating more intelligence inside the organization, right? And so the
OKR project leads would be doing the training, for example, and the cycle coaching.
Ideally, those people will become what we call internal coaches, right? So I'm an external coach because I have clients,
right?
So I can't be there for the whole time. The first cycle, I'll do the training. I'll do as much as I can. I'll do all the cycle coaching, et cetera. Those project leads often do become internal coaches over time. So they're going to just learn through osmosis how to do this internal OKRs coaching thing, where they then do exactly like you said, right? They ask those questions to the teams, right? Why are we working on this objective? They're sort of facilitating trainings. That's an ideal world. In a larger organization, you're going to need more than 2. So we'll actually do a different type of a training called the internal coach training workshop. Now that does go for a full day, let's say, where we'll try to get 10 to 20 people up to speed on how to do OKRs coaching. Because here's the thing, this isn't rocket science. I think in one day, you can pretty much learn to be an effective OKRs coach. Yeah, you need to practice the skills to get better. But the theory is so small. I mean, actually, even in this conversation, we probably covered more than half of the theory of OKRs.
Awesome. You talked also about a phased approach, right? So how do you help clients determine the right pace for implementation of OKRs, for example?
Yeah, I mean, so many of the organizations I talk to, I say, what's your, even though they were successful with OKRs overall, I would say, what's your one thing you wish you did differently? And the common theme is, I wish we slowed down, right? Instead of rolling out OKRs all across the board, I wish we had done maybe, one team for the first cycle, or just the company for the first year, or something like that, right? Rather than, hey, we're setting OKRs at 80 teams, next quarter or something. We're just going to do it. Let's go. And what I found was my most successful client in my early days was actually a company called Zalando, big company in Berlin, super cool company at the time, actually very small, but now is like definitely a massive player. And what they did was they said, hey, let's pick this one team. It's called Brand Solutions, about 80 people. And let's just do OKRs with Brand Solutions for a year. and see how it goes. So they actually completed several cycles of setting OKRs, reflecting and resetting and doing check-ins and all that. And after a year, they were incredibly successful. So now the CEO said, okay, great. Now that we've seen success in this team, let's try setting it at the senior executive level, right? Now, now that it's been proven to work at the team level. That was an interesting model. And they were able to borrow some of the best practices that they'd created and, sort of have these internal coaches play the role. And then they did the senior executive team. Then they did the business units, right? Then they eventually scaled it across the organization, but it took them years to get there, right? So they didn't just do a massive, like launch of OKRs across the organization. They took what we call a crawl, walk, run approach.
Okay. One thing I was thinking about when I was reading the book, in project management, oftentimes a company will have the PMO, the project management office, which will help set standards and for scoring, for keeping track of projects. And it's like a centralized, this is how we do projects, quote unquote.
Yes.
Is there such a thing for OKRs? And do you recommend having like a unit just kind of help run those?
It's really funny that you mentioned that because it shows you how I'm not such an expert in project management. But yeah, PMO. I didn't give you that when I was talking about agile coaches, HR business partners, that happens all the time. Mm-hmm. To be totally honest with you, I totally blew it on that one because PMOs often serve as the kind of the organization that supports the OKRs program, especially in bigger companies. And those people tend to be really like good at this stuff, right? So they're like ready to go. I'll work with a PMO and we'll just be like, all right, we're going to get the deployment parameters over here. We're going to create an FAQs document. I'm like, well, so, okay. So I love it when I get approached by the PMO organization, and usually they'll have several people, like more than even two. They'll have 3 or 4 kind of OKRs project leads working together. They'll know, we got to bring in somebody from HR for this because we got to make sure we have the answer to the question, how do we make sure OKRs are, how do they relate to our performance reviews? Because they know that this is going to be on the back of people's minds. So they do a good job of managing it. And by the way, I think I mentioned earlier that it's got to be, 2 project leads from different groups. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's true with PMO. What I found with PMO is it should be at least 2 people, preferably even 3 from PMO. But then I have not seen an organization say, oh, okay, this is just another PMO thing. I think the organization gets it that PMO is like, these guys are trying to help the organization overall. And they usually report somehow, maybe you know more about this than I do, but they seem to report pretty directly either to the head of strategy or directly even to the CEO.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they probably welcome this conversation a lot because OKRs it's a bit more strategy, right? Than just tactics on how to deliver the project, right? Which PMO tends to, not everywhere, but they tend to focus more on, okay, here's how we're going to do projects from now on. We need to use this tool. We need to report it this way. Here are the metrics that we need, things like that. While this OKR conversation just kind of takes them up a notch, right? Into like, okay, not just like how we're going to do it, but why, right? And, and that's probably like welcomed by I'll bet the PMO folks are excited to talk to you about OKRs.
Yeah. And I've even seen some of these guys show me like, okay, here's what we're doing for our projects now. We're using this thing. And it gets a little bit down into the, who's approving. And like, it almost looks like a DocuSign, agreement or something where, you're going to go down and it gets to be a little bit too much detail. And so what they did was they started requiring effectively an OKR kind of a cover page for every project. And this was really cool, right? Because they would say if it was a project that was going to last, I think it was more than a year and it involved more than 3 people, right? So it couldn't be, this really small project, but if it was a project that was somewhat significant in the organization in terms of resources and time, they would actually put an OKR on front, just one, the objective of this project is this, here's why this project is important, and here's how we're going to measure our success on this project. And the PMOs, everybody loved this because it was just a single format that everybody used for every project. So even though I say don't set OKRs for everything, all over the place, take a crawl, walk, run approach, the PMO organization in this particular client example did that. I think they had like 50 projects running that were these multi-year kind of, intense projects at the same time. And they had one OKR for each of those projects. They found that to be very helpful. Yeah.
I think some organizations are set up for that, like, because of their especially if they have related to compliance and things like that. If you're working for the government, for example, you need to have all these things in place. So it might be, the branches of the fractal are already in place, so you can just feed anything to it, and it goes everywhere, right? Like the OKR idea, for example, it can just, hey, we're gonna do that from now on, and the systems are in place, and they know the characters, they know, so it's easier. While other organizations are more difficult, like the organization I work for is like we tend not to get too into the nitty-gritty of how to do things for each individual team, which is great. You have more freedom to use whatever methodology you want to deliver on things, but it hurts us on centralization, which is one thing that you talk about here, OKR tracking and scoring, right? So maybe that's a good segue to that. So centralizing OKR tracking, what's the value of that, and how would you do that? Like if you're going through, the crawling phase right now?
Yeah. I mean, when you're first starting with OKRs, I don't think it makes sense to go out and buy like a dedicated OKR software tool out of the gate. Mm-hmm. I am finding more and more that later on, it could be very helpful to have some kind of a centralized OKRs dedicated application. So I don't want to say don't get OKR software, but I want to say when you're first starting, don't get OKR software, because you're still designing your process.
Right.
And typically people use, I don't know, Google Sheets or Google Slides or whatever kind of collaborative thing they like to use. Even if you have something like Airtable, mm-hmm. if you already use that, or Smart Sheets or something like that, and it's something that or even like if you have Jira or whatever, right? If the company is used to using this type of a system, like they all have logins and stuff, they can access it. You can usually build some kind of a centralized OKR repository. And the reason why I like to have that is once you publish the OKRs, it's very important to have them all in a single location, because then everybody knows where they are. They're fresh. If people want to make updates to things, right? They want to, because in the check-in, usually we'll put some notes into that key result. It's good to have all that documented somewhere. It just makes it more standardized, right? As opposed to, I don't know which version this is, and people have OKRs, all of these different PowerPoint slides. It also depends on how many OKRs you have, right? I have one client now, they're a big time tech company, but they're just doing their OKRs in Google Slides because they have something like 3 objectives with maybe 10 key results total. So it's fine in that case to just use something like Google Slides. And, every couple weeks, they'll just create a new slide deck, and it takes them, a half an hour or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's no big deal. But if you start to get, hundreds of key results, you really do need to have some kind of a more thought through system. Like I mentioned, either like an Airtable or a Smart Sheets or something that's more dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Now, a couple of questions on that. Like what if, like we talked about, maybe a division that's like infrastructure, for example, they have OKRs that are not directly related to the main ones for their organization. And then what if different divisions will have different OKR cycle lengths, right? How do we, in a centralized way, how do we make sense of that? Let's say this team here is on a 6-month cycle, the other one is on an 8th month. We're starting following quarters or not, and this OKR here has nothing to do with the other ones because it's like upgrading the database here from DOS.
Yeah.
How is there a benefit to have it all together when it's kind of disjointed like that?
I mean, this is a great point. I think that depending on the sort of the culture of your company. If the OKRs, for example, I've even seen in a, let's say a marketing team where they had 5 different sort of marketing sub-teams, but to be honest, none of these marketing sub-teams needed to collaborate at all. So it was like one of them was, let's say SEO, but one of them was like, let's say outbound or something, right? So outbound is just doing all these, marketing programs that have to do with outbound marketing. It's completely unrelated to inbound marketing. In which case, it doesn't actually do you any value, really, to put all these things in one place, because who cares, right? I'm doing my thing, you're doing your thing. So I shouldn't say that like all OKRs in an organization have to be in a single location. What I'm trying to say is all OKRs where there's either cross-functional collaboration or people are like looking at things together. So if it's, an engineering team, it would be really good for them to be able to see their OKRs in one place, because after all, they want to look at all their work within engineering. The trick is they may be collaborating with an infrastructure team that has 8-month cycles, a marketing team that has 4-month cycles, another marketing team that has 6-month cycles, right? So it can become kind of a zoo. And I think as long as the engineers have some way of getting a single view that pulls all those OKRs together that they're involved in, they're probably fine. But this is where you're going to need some kind of a more advanced technology solution, especially true with bigger companies.
Right. Yeah. And folks might just decide, hey, we should probably get on the same cycle here, just for simplicity's sake, so we can understand what's happening.
That's true as well. Usually if you do have multiple cycles, it's not so much like every team is on a different cycle time, but rather you might have the company OKRs be annual, and then the business units are 6 months, and then the teams are quarterly or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then this works a lot better, right? But if you just say, hey, everybody do whatever cycle time you want, good luck with that. And especially when you're first starting with OKRs, what you just said is spot on. You pick a single cycle time and everybody just sticks to that for the first couple cycles, because you don't want to overthink this, right? I mean, who knows what the right cycle time is for your team? So let's just pick, 6 months or, 3 months or 4 months. Those are the three common ones. And then just like everybody sticks to that to simplify things. And then after the first year or so, then you start to talk about, wait a minute, is this cycle time really working for us?
Right. Cool. I want to talk about mid-cycle reviews and the reflect and reset moment, because I find that sometimes the folks who are really excited and helping set up the OKRs, they're the big idea folks. And then folks who are implementing the projects that are going to feed into the KRs, they're more detail-oriented, task-oriented, janitorial, like I'm going to make sure everything is checked off. And sometimes they speaking different languages, right? So how do we implement like a mid-cycle review, like halfway through that cycle, that, hey, we are tracking this. And then at the end, lessons learned, a lot of companies do that and create a doc, and then it just sits there. How do we make sure that we're actually learning from each cycle here?
Yeah. So let's start with step 2, which is checking in. And I think there's really 2 types of check-ins, right? There's your check-in just for your team. So imagine that you're a project leader and you're working on your OKR and it's just one OKR. You can absolutely meet with your team even every week and talk about progress on that OKR, because after all, there's only 3 or 4 key results for that objective. And you're going to have a small group of people, and it's going to be very focused on the work you're doing. So in that case, you can also get into the details. Like you said, you could spend 10 minutes talking about a key result and nobody will even flinch. However, if you do a mid-cycle check-in, typically that will involve multiple teams, or like, let's say multiple projects coming together to give an update on progress. In this case, you might be updating an executive, and you want to have your key result champions who have their name next to each key result speaking for very small amounts of time, very, very efficiently, giving an update at the right level of detail. So this might be, 3 or 4 minutes update per key result. I would say 5 minutes, absolute maximum, right? Because depending on how many key results you have to be careful, because these calls should not go for more than an hour. If they're 2 or 3 hours, people are going to be wondering, what are we doing here? And now they're going to give an update in a very structured format. So it has to be that when you're giving the update to the key result, everyone who speaks about the key result at a mid-cycle check-in does it in exactly the same template. And usually it's a 4-box template. I think it's even in the field book, right? So it's usually, first of all, here's where we are now, right? Here's the current value of that key result. Just a very much matter of fact, right? If it's a metric, it can be incredibly simple, right? If it's, here's how many sales reps will have trained on the new API. We started with 2, now we have 6. It's just, the answer is 6, or 2 to 6, right? We've improved. Then the next box is, okay, how confident are we that we're going to achieve the key result? Now, typically when we write key results, you're going to write them at that 50-50 level, right? It's 50% likely to be hit by the end of the cycle. And so when you first wrote the key result, your confidence level was 50%. So if you were doing a check-in right away, it would be 50%. But now we're in the mid-cycle, you're going to tell me the confidence level. And it's usually either increasing, like now it's 80% confident, or it's decreasing, like now it's 20% confident, right? We're not confident. Or it's still 50%, could be possible as well, right? Or you could even say it's 100% because maybe this thing's already achieved and there's nothing to talk about. Or it could even be 0% because you're realizing absolutely there's no way that this key result will be achieved. Doesn't matter. Put in your best guess of your confidence. And really what's important is the difference. So usually here they put, 50-80. My confidence went from 50% to 80%, or 50-0. Okay. Well, if you put 50-0, you're saying we're not going to achieve this key result. This is your time to make that announcement. And then the next box is the blockers. And so if you put 50-0, meaning it's not going to be achieved, you really want to then talk about what is blocking us from success. Is there a timing issue? Is there a resources issue? What is going on? Then you also have a bonus item in that box 3, which is it driving the right behavior? Because let's say you went 50-90, right? So you said 50% confident is where we started, but now I'm 90% confident we can achieve it. Great. But is the key result driving the right behavior? Because you might say, well, the key result was to get more leads, but guess what? We're buying these leads now through some ridiculous search engine, optimization thing that's costing us all this money, or paid search or whatever. And it's going to be it's actually not driving the right behavior. Mm-hmm. Or we're hiring people in India to download the mobile app or something. So we're gaming the system. This is not good. Or somebody's working so hard that, they're going to probably have to quit in the marketing department if we don't, slow this thing down. So that's box 3. And then box 4 is, here are the 3. Okay, my magic number is 3. Here are the 3 next steps. No more than that. 3 critical action items coming back up. So we can't put a list of and here's the 100 things that we're going to do, because nobody wants to see that. And that's why I like to limit it to 3, because you're going to actually make a verbal report on what's happening in this key result. That's the check-in at the mid-cycle check-in, and it's got to be incredibly short. Sometimes at this mid-cycle check-in, this is actually based on a true story. I had 20 teams. It was a major media company, and they have 20 teams that have to update their OKRs in the mid-cycle check-in to this one senior leader. Okay, so there's no way we're going to spend even 5 minutes per key result, because 20 teams, they have let's say 8 key results each. I mean, we're talking 160 key results, right? We're not going to go through them all. So what we did is we had each of the 20 teams, we gave them 2 minutes. So that's 40 minutes. And they took 1 minute to update a key result where they had a big win, right? So this is a highlight. This is a best of. Here's a key result where we really are winning. We're moving the needle. And then they said, now here's a key result where we're not. We're learning. So they really dumbed it down and just showed those 2 things. And then that was actually a chance for people to see, okay, so we're hitting some of our key results. That's great. But also we're failing on some, and we're learning, right? We're documenting that learning, which is super important with the OKRs approach, which is it should also allow you to fail and learn from your mistakes, because the cycle is fairly short.
Great. That's awesome. Now, before we go here, I wanted to talk about this, the key result champion, and specifically because I think this is something that project managers could really shine here, because we do have that skill set. I believe, especially after reading what you talk about here in the book. So, what is the key result champion? How can we select them? How can we empower them? And how can we recognize them?
Yeah. So the key result champion is really the spokesperson for the key result. They're the one that gives the update at that check-in. They're the one that manages the team, usually 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 people, who are going to get those action items done, every week or 2. Mm-hmm. So the key result champion, and sometimes there are 2 key result champions for a given key result, especially if it's super cross-functional. You might have, finance and HR, or engineering and product, or what have you. And that key result champion, it is really a chance to shine, because those people will be speaking in front of senior leadership at least once in the cycle. And they also have to be somebody that's, look, it's not necessarily your job to achieve the key result. Like I said, it might be that at that mid-cycle check-in, you say, well, we were 50% confident. Now we're 0. Well, okay, good. Tell me about that now, right? Don't surprise me at the end and say, we're 50%. Oh, now I'm 80%. And then at the last second say, oh, it turns out we're 0%. That's not going to work, right?
Right.
So you have to be somebody that's good at managing expectations, identifying problems, being proactive, and alerting these things to senior management.
Yeah, which is a great definition of a skill set of a project manager. So I think this is a great way for those listening right now. If you're not in a senior leadership position, but you are a project manager, and your company's rolling out OKRs, see if we can. I believe that's a great way for you to go and flex your project management muscles within the OKR ecosystem here to be that champion. And
I'll leave you with a thought, which is I really want to challenge everybody, whether you're doing OKRs formally or not. Remember my coach, right, who was helping me with my book. Mm-hmm. Just ask those OKRs coaching questions, and then you're doing OKRs, even if you don't actually write down OKRs. And that's really the value I see with OKRs. I find a lot of organizations that do OKRs in the sense that they think they're doing it. They're writing down OKRs. Lots of teams have adopted it. But between you and me, they're not getting the value of OKRs. I've seen other organizations that, quote, don't do OKRs, but they have people going around asking these questions, right? What is the intended outcome of the task? How will we know that project is a success? Why is that project important right now? And, what is the intended outcome of it, or something like that, right? These types of questions, and asking these questions all the time, that's really where you'll start to see the value of OKRs.
Awesome. Ben, what a pleasure talking to you. So the book is called The OKRs Field Book, a step-by-step guide for objectives and key results. Coach is by Ben Lamorte, published by Wiley. I have it here in my hand. It's a fantastic book. It's a pithy reading. It's not very long, but it's full of very, very valuable information. If you know about OKRs and you've had a hard time implementing it, I really recommend this book. Ben, thank you so much for writing. Thank you for being on the show. If people want to learn more about you and what you do, where should they go?
Well, I would just go to www.okrs.com. That's my website. And from there, you can click on, contact me, or download a PDF preview of the book. There's all kinds of things you can do from that site, including watching videos and even listening to some of these podcast type interviews that we're doing.
Right. And the book is also available on Audible. I got it there too. So it's a good listen to. If you're into audiobooks and podcasts, it's available there too. Ben, again, thank you so much for making the time. It's an honor to talk to you. I got so much from your book and from this conversation, and maybe we can chat again in the future about your next book.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks so much, Cesar.
Thank you for listening to the PM for the Masses podcast.
Tune in next week for more great ideas on how to manage your projects better and truly stand out in your industry.
PMforthemasses.com